Before the law descended, before prophecy took form in human speech, before command became covenant, there was knowledge transmitted without containment. A single figure stood at Eden's eastern gate, cast out for having crossed a boundary that could not be uncrossed. The ground no longer responded. The air carried no instruction. Mortality had entered his blood. And in that moment, the first exile, an angel descended, not to comfort, not to guide, not to explain, but to transmit. Raziel, keeper of secrets, holder of measures, brought to the first human a book, not scripture, not law, not promise. A book containing the architecture of what had been lost and what should not yet have been given. The transmission was irreversible. Once the knowledge passed from angelic hand to human grasp, it could not be withdrawn. But it could not be fully used either. The structures it revealed were too precise for integration. The names it contained functioned only under conditions humanity did not yet possess. The measures it described governed realities humanity could no longer inhabit. Knowledge had arrived before the vessel capable of holding it existed. And with that arrival, a second exile began, not from place but from clarity itself. This is the story of the first premature revelation, the origin of both illumination and instability. The moment precision entered the world too soon. The tradition of Raziel's book emerges from the cosmological expansions that follow Genesis. Centuries after the canon solidified, Jewish mystical literature began to fill the silences the law had left intact. What happened between expulsion and the first murder? What knowledge accompanied Adam outside paradise? The figure of Raziel appears in these spaces, not as character, but as function in transmission. His name means secret of God, and his role is not to teach, but to deliver. Angels in this tradition do not instruct. They carry what has been determined and place it where it must go. Raziel's descent to Adam is framed as an act of necessity, not mercy. The knowledge contained in the book was not withheld to protect humanity, but because its transmission required a condition Eden had not allowed: separation. Only outside paradise, only in exile, only in the state of mortality and labor, could the structures of creation be viewed from a distance sufficient to recognize them as structures at all. But the book predates its delivery. Texts describe it as existing before creation, inscribed on sapphire, written in flames that did not consume, containing the measurements of heaven and earth, the courses of stars, the names governing forces both visible and concealed. It was not composed for Adam, but revealed because no other option remained. The tradition clarifies, this is not scripture. It does not command. It does not prohibit. It does not promise redemption or outline ritual. It is cosmological instruction without containment. Structure disclosed without the preparation required to integrate it. The book describes how creation operates, but it does not explain why. It names forces, but does not grant authority over them. It offers precision, but not meaning. This distinction is essential. Raziel's book represents knowledge prior to regulation. It is revelation before law, transmission before tradition, structure before story. Later, mystical systems would develop elaborate hierarchies of angels, methods of ascent, protocols for approaching divine names. But the book precedes all of this. It is the raw material from which later systems emerged, knowledge given in its unprocessed state before the safeguards were constructed. And because of this, the transmission carried a cost. Angels, according to the tradition, protested, not because the knowledge was false, but because its partial disclosure would destabilize. What humans received was incomplete, not deliberately withheld, but incomplete by necessity. The structures it revealed functioned as a whole, separated from their origin, made accessible in fragments. They became both tools and traps. The book was never meant to circulate. It was transmitted once to one recipient at the threshold of exile. And from that single transmission, all subsequent instability followed. The book is described across fragmentary sources as a metaphysical object whose physical form could not contain what it carried. Sapphire tablets, letters carved in fire, dimensions exceeding human perception. These descriptions indicate not information recorded in matter, but structure made partially visible, a crystallization of forces that normally remained fluid, invisible, operational, but unseen. What the book contained varied across sources, but certain elements recur with precision. It held the measurements of creation, the distances between heavens, the paths of celestial bodies, the hidden names governing each sphere. It revealed the structure of angelic hierarchies, not as ranks of beings, but as functions within a cosmological order. It described how forces interact, how names activate principles, how speech operates as generative power rather than representation. Crucially, the book also contained knowledge of what would unfold in time. Not prophecy in the sense of foretelling events, but the patterns according to which events would necessarily develop. Time itself, in this framework, was not linear progression, but structured unfolding. Creation moving through predetermined measures toward predetermined endpoints. To know these measures was to perceive time's architecture, to see the present as one point within a larger geometry. But the book's transmission was incomplete. Angelic resistance appears repeatedly in the tradition. Angels saw what humans could not. That knowledge of structure without integration produces distortion. To know names without the capacity to bear them. To perceive measures without having aligned to them. To understand creation's operation without being unified with creation's purpose. This is why the book became dangerous, not false, but conditional. The names activated forces, but without calibration, those forces acted unpredictably. The measures described realities humanity could no longer access, creating a gap between perception and participation. Later traditions responded to this danger in multiple ways. Some texts describe the book being stolen by jealous angels and cast into the ocean, from which it was later recovered. Others claim it was passed down through generations, from Adam to Enoch, from Enoch to Noah, gradually accumulating commentary and safeguards. Still others suggest it was deliberately buried, hidden, encoded in such a way that its full meaning could only be reconstructed by those who had already achieved the alignment it described. All of these responses share a common recognition. The book could not be destroyed, but it could not remain accessible in its original form. Its knowledge was too precise to be discarded, too destabilizing to circulate freely. The solution was not to eliminate the transmission, but to fragment it, to distribute its contents across multiple traditions, to embed its teachings within ritual frameworks, to require initiation as a prerequisite for interpretation. This fragmentation was not failure, it was adaptation. The book's partial withdrawal allowed later systems to develop methods for approaching its knowledge safely. Mystery traditions, initiatory hierarchies, oral transmission, symbolic encoding. All of these emerged as responses to the original instability. They represented not the loss of knowledge, but the creation of containers capable of holding it. Yet even in its fragmented state, the book remained operative. Its influence persisted not as complete teaching, but as recurring pattern. The structures it revealed continued to appear across traditions, each offering a partial view of what the original transmission had disclosed in its unregulated form. The book was never destroyed, it was dispersed. And in dispersion, it became foundation. To understand Raziel's book within Hermetic metaphysics is to recognize it as crystallized Nous, divine intellect impressed into form without incarnation. The book is not information, but structure made visible. The operational logic of creation rendered accessible to perception without integration into being. In Hermetic doctrine, Nous represents the ordering principle of existence, the intelligence that structures cosmos from chaos. Not a being, but the capacity for intelligibility itself. When Nous descends into manifestation, it moves through progressive stages of density. At its highest, Nous remains unified with Source. At its most dense, it becomes word, symbol, form. Raziel's book represents Nous at the threshold of this descent, intelligence that has taken form but not yet found vessel. The letters it contains are not arbitrary symbols, but active forces, each one a condensation of principle into pattern. To read these letters is not to decode meaning, but to participate in the forces they embody. Yet participation without alignment produces distortion. The letters function, but their function depends on the state of the one who activates them. This is the essential tension. The book offers direct access to structure, but structure without unification creates fragmentation. To know the names is to perceive the forces they govern, but perception alone does not grant mastery. The names must be spoken from a state of alignment, from a condition where the speaker has become integrated into the order the names describe. Otherwise, the names activate forces that the speaker cannot contain. Hermetic tradition describes this condition as premature reception, knowledge received before the interior preparation necessary to integrate it has been completed. Such knowledge does not illuminate, it blinds. It does not liberate, it binds. The recipient perceives truth but cannot embody it, sees structure but cannot participate in it, grasps principles but cannot apply them. This is why the book was described as dangerous. Not because its contents were false, but because they were accurate. The danger lay not in deception, but in precision. truth delivered before the capacity to hold truth had been developed. The Hermetic solution to this problem was progressive initiation. Knowledge was transmitted in stages, each stage corresponding to a degree of interior development. What could not be given all at once could be approached gradually, allowing integration to occur alongside revelation. The mysteries were structured not to conceal truth, but to protect the recipient from the consequences of premature clarity. Raziel's book, in this framework, represents the original necessity for such structures. It is the template for all later initiatory systems. The demonstration that direct transmission without preparation produces exile rather than enlightenment. The book itself could not be withdrawn, but its approach could be regulated. Later traditions did not reject the book's knowledge. They created the conditions under which that knowledge could be received without destruction. What Raziel transmitted remains operative, but its operation now occurs within frameworks designed to contain it, to distribute its force gradually, to allow the vessel to strengthen as the knowledge enters. The book was not lost. It was ritualized, and in that ritualization, its transmission became possible again. The structural tension represented by Raziel's book appears across multiple traditions, each preserving a fragment of the original pattern. The recurrence is not synthesis, but resonance, similar recognitions emerging from different cosmological frameworks, each responding to the same fundamental problem: knowledge that arrives before readiness. In Zoroastrian tradition, Gzwara, divine radiant glory, operates as force that descends into creation, but cannot be held without alignment with Asha. Kings who possess Ixwara without righteousness lose it catastrophically. The parallel is structural. Power granted conditionally, effective only when the recipient has achieved necessary containment. In early Enochian literature, the Watcher's transmission of forbidden knowledge follows a similar pattern. Azazel teaches metalworking, cosmetics, weapons. Shemihaza reveals incantations and root cutting. Barakel discloses astrology. Each transmission offers functional knowledge, techniques that work, but without the ethical framework to integrate them. The result is not ignorance overcome, but corruption introduced. Knowledge functions, but outside its proper order, and the functioning itself becomes destructive. Greek mystery traditions approach this problem through staged initiation. The Eleusinian mysteries, the Orphic rites, the Pythagorean disciplines, all structured access to knowledge through progressive revelation. The lesser mysteries prepared initiates for the greater mysteries. Preparatory rites preceded direct encounter. Symbolic teaching came before literal disclosure. The pattern is consistent. What cannot be given all at once can be approached through calibrated stages. Hermetic texts codify this principle explicitly. The Corpus Hermeticum describes grades of teaching corresponding to grades of spiritual development. Certain truths are accessible only to those who have achieved the interior transformation necessary to comprehend them. Thrice. Greatest Hermes does not conceal knowledge arbitrarily, but recognizes that premature revelation produces confusion rather than clarity. Even within Christianity, Pauline writings preserve this tension. I fed you with milk, not solid food, for you were not ready for it. The image is developmental. What must eventually be given cannot be given immediately. Capacity must be built before transmission occurs. Otherwise, knowledge overwhelms rather than nourishes. The pattern repeats because the problem is structural, not cultural. Across traditions separated by geography, language, and cosmology, the same recognition appears. Direct transmission of operational knowledge without preparation for that knowledge creates instability. The response is not to eliminate transmission, but to regulate it, to create frameworks, hierarchies, rituals, and stages that allow knowledge to enter gradually, matched to the developing capacity of the recipient. Raziel's book stands as the archetype of this necessity. Not the first transmission, perhaps, but the transmission that made all subsequent regulation necessary. The moment precision entered the world before the world was ready to hold it. The existence of Raziel's book implies several conclusions. Later traditions have worked to conceal, regulate, or ritualize. First, humanity was never intended to remain ignorant. The book's transmission demonstrates that knowledge of creation's structure was always meant to pass to human awareness. Exile from paradise was not exile from knowledge itself, but from immediate unmediated knowledge. Outside paradise, knowledge became mediated, structured, transmitted through form rather than experienced directly. But transmission continued. Second, clarity itself can be destabilizing. The problem was not that the book contained falsehood, but that it contained truth without context. To perceive structure accurately before having integrated oneself into that structure creates a gap. The knower separated from the known, awareness operating from outside what it perceives. This gap is the origin of both philosophical inquiry and spiritual exile. Knowledge becomes possible, but only through distance. Understanding emerges, but only from separation. Third, revelation required regulation, not to prevent knowledge, but to allow it. The initial transmission failed, not because knowledge was given, but because it was given completely, immediately, without calibration to capacity. Later traditions learned from this failure. Mystery cults, esoteric schools, initiatory hierarchies, all represent attempts to transmit the same knowledge Raziel delivered, but gradually, conditionally, in forms matched to developing readiness. This is why oral transmission replaced written texts in mystical lineages. What could be written could be accessed prematurely. What could be accessed prematurely could destabilize before illumination. Oral transmission allowed teachers to gauge readiness, to adapt revelation to capacity, to withhold or release based on developing state. The wisdom was protected out of necessity, not hidden from elitism. Fourth, secrecy became survival. Traditions that transmitted powerful knowledge openly often did not survive. Either external persecution destroyed them, or internal dissolution fragmented them. Those that encoded their teachings, that required initiation, that maintained hierarchies of access, these traditions persisted, not because secrecy was virtue, but because premature clarity was dangerous. To the unprepared, to the misaligned, to those seeking power rather than integration, the knowledge became destructive. The book, in this light, represents both origin and warning. It demonstrates that illumination and instability share a common source. That knowledge can arrive correctly and still cause harm. That truth, uncontained, operates like fire, useful when controlled, devastating when released without boundary. Every initiatory tradition that followed learned this lesson, not to prevent knowledge, but to prepare the vessel, not to conceal truth, but to build capacity before revelation. The book was never destroyed because it could not be destroyed, but it was withdrawn, fragmented, encoded, ritualized, transformed from immediate transmission into gradual approach. And in that transformation, it became teachable again. The book was never destroyed, it was withdrawn, not because its knowledge was false, but because its knowledge was incomplete. Precision without integration, structure without alignment, truth delivered before the vessel capable of containing it had been forged. Raziel descended once, transmitted once. The knowledge passed from angelic hand to mortal grasp in a single, irreversible moment. And in that moment, the pattern was established. That revelation without readiness produces exile. That clarity without capacity creates fragmentation. That truth uncontained becomes both gift and wound. Every tradition that followed inherited this original tension. Every mystery school, every initiatory hierarchy, every oral lineage structured around progressive disclosure, learned from what Raziel's transmission revealed, that knowledge must be matched to the state of the recipient, or it functions as poison rather than nourishment. The book remains, not in its original form, but distributed across fragmentary texts, encoded in ritual, embedded in symbol, accessible only through the very preparation its premature transmission made necessary. Humanity was given the architecture of creation before humanity could integrate into that architecture. And from that first exile into precision, all subsequent paths toward reintegration have emerged. The knowledge arrived before the form capable of holding it existed. And the work of every tradition since has been to build that form, gradually, carefully, so that what was once given prematurely might finally be received.